Amina thought that marrying an Arab millionaire would change her life for the better. She imagined a life filled with luxury and love. But soon, her life of wealth and control turned into a nightmare. Could she escape this life? It was a golden summer afternoon, and the Caribbean coast sparkled like a memory waiting to happen. Amina walked along the beach, her bare feet sinking into the warm, soft sand with each step. Her long brown hair blew in the breeze, framing her almond-shaped eyes as she gazed out at the endless horizon. At 20, Amina's life seemed perfect. She was young, determined, and had big plans to become a nurse, a dream she had worked hard to achieve. Her days were peaceful, calm like the sea in front of her. Then she saw him. He was standing not far from her on the beach, his tall figure standing out against the setting sun. His skin had the sun-kissed glow of someone used to the outdoors, and his eyes, dark and intense, looked at her with curiosity. His name was Zaid, she would later learn. He was from Saudi Arabia and was on holiday with his family. For Amina, that first glance felt like a scene from a story, like the kind her mother had warned her about, full of strangers and excitement. Zaid's gaze softened as he walked toward her. His English had an accent, but it was soft and charming, as if he was carefully choosing each word. "It's beautiful here, isn't it?" he said, looking out at the horizon, just like Amina had been moments before. Amina smiled, drawn to his calm confidence and presence in her small, familiar world. The days that followed were filled with moments of discovery. Each time they met, it felt like a secret treasure. They walked along the shore, her laughter blending with the sound of the waves, as she listened to his stories of faraway lands, tales of luxury and tradition, so different from her own life. His words painted vivid pictures in her mind, vast deserts, golden palaces, and ancient traditions. Amina found herself fascinated by his world, her curiosity growing with each story and each shared sunset. She told him about her life here, her simple but loving family home, and her dream of becoming a nurse to help others. Zaid listened intently, making her heart race. One evening, under a sky full of stars, Zaid said something that took her by surprise. "Come with me to Saudi Arabia, Amina. Let me show you my world." His voice was soft and hopeful. In the quiet night, his gaze held hers with such sincerity that her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated. The idea of leaving everything she knew was both exciting and frightening. "But my studies, my family..." Amina's voice trailed off as she looked for answers in his face. He smiled gently, taking her hand. "I will take care of everything. You don't have to worry about anything. Just say yes. Think of it as an adventure, a new start." That night, Amina lay awake, her mind racing. The idea of leaving everything behind felt like standing on the edge of the unknown. But his voice, his words, kept echoing in her mind, pulling her toward something bigger than her own world. The next morning, Amina told her mother. Her mother's face showed clear concern, but after hearing Amina's excitement and seeing the spark in her eyes, she sighed. "Take care. The world outside is not always as kind as it seems," her mother warned, though Amina hardly heard her in her excitement. All Amina could think of was the chance to see the life Zaid had described, life far beyond her small town. With her mother's reluctant blessing, Amina packed her bag. Her heart was filled with both fear and excitement as she boarded the plane to a country she had only heard about in stories. Her mind buzzed with what might be waiting for her. When they landed in Riyadh, the city felt like a dream. The tall buildings were made of steel and glass, reaching for the sky, while below, the old markets and minarets brought color and tradition to the scene. But nothing could have prepared her for the mansion she was about to see. It stood tall and grand, an oasis in the middle of the desert, with lush gardens and fountains, all in stark contrast to the dry sand around it. That evening, during a fancy dinner under chandeliers, with the silverware shining softly in the warm light, Zaid stood up. His gaze was gentle yet firm. He knelt down on one knee, his voice full of emotion as he looked into her eyes. "Amina, will you marry me?" The room became quiet, and Amina felt a lump in her throat. She stared at him, this man who had brought her into a world so different from her own, and the weight of his words filled her with both excitement and fear. She didn't know then that saying yes would lead her not just to marriage, but into a life that would test everything she thought she knew about herself and love. But in that moment, with his eyes on hers and her heart racing, Amina whispered, "Yes." Zaid asked her every night to marry him again, and with each passing evening, Amina's resolve grew weaker. The love she felt for him, mixed with the wonder of this new world, started to cloud her judgment. Maybe, she thought, she could have the best of both worlds. After a week, Amina finally agreed. Zaid was overjoyed, and without hesitation, they began planning a wedding that would be nothing short of grand. Amina was shocked by how quickly things were moving. She barely had time to think it all through. In a quiet moment, she asked to call her mother to share the news. With shaking hands, Amina dialed the number. "Mum," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and nervousness, "I'm getting married to Zaid." The silence on the other end felt heavy. Her mother's voice was filled with worry. "Amina, my child, are you sure? It's too soon. You don't really know him. His culture is so different." But Amina, swept up in the love and promises of a dream life, brushed off her mother's worries. Wedding preparations continued at a fast pace, and Amina found herself surrounded by silks, jewelry, and new customs. The women in Zaid's family taught her how to be a wife in their culture. When Amina's family arrived in Zaid's country, their faces showed both happiness and concern. Her mother hugged her tightly and whispered, "There's still time to change your mind, honey." But Amina, dazzled by the love and luxury around her, shook her head. "I'm happy, Mom. Everything will be fine." The wedding was full of luxury and tradition. Amina wore a dress that looked like it came from a fairy tale and felt like a princess. The love in Zaid's eyes made any doubts she had disappear. After 3 days of celebration, it was time to say goodbye. Zaid suggested that Amina's family leave, saying the couple needed privacy to start their new life. Amina, still lost in happiness, barely noticed her family's hesitation as they left, watching their car drive to the airport. A strange feeling settled in Amina's heart. It felt like a part of her had gone with them, leaving her alone in this new world she was just starting to explore. The first days after the wedding felt like a dream. Zaid showered her with attention, gifts, and promises of eternal love. They walked through the mansion's gardens, had romantic dinners under the desert stars, and talked for hours about their dreams and future. But slowly, Amina began to notice small changes in Zaid's behavior. What had seemed like love and care started to feel like control. The first sign came when Zaid suggested she delete her social media profiles. "My love," he said one afternoon, his voice gentle but firm, "you're my wife now. You don't need those distractions. Here, you have everything you need." Amina, surprised, tried to explain that her social media was how she kept in touch with her family and friends back in the United States. But Zaid insisted, his tone becoming more commanding. "It's for your own good, Amina. The outside world will only bring trouble to our happiness." Reluctantly, Amina agreed, convincing herself it was a small price to pay for her new life. The next change came when Zaid gave her an entirely new wardrobe filled with abayas and veils. "These are the clothes a married woman should wear in our culture," he explained. Amina, uncomfortable with the idea of covering herself completely, tried to argue. "But Zaid, I'm not Muslim. Can't I wear something a bit more Western? His expression hardened. You are my wife now, Amina. You must respect our customs. In time, you will understand and accept our way of life. Slowly, Amina found herself cut off from the outside world. Her outings were limited to family events or social gatherings, always with Zaid watching her closely. Calls to her family in the United States became rare and brief, with Zaid always present, listening to every word. One day Zaid told her to delete all her contacts from her phone, even her mother's number. You don't need them anymore, he said. I am your family now. With tears in her eyes, Amina begged to keep at least her mother's contact, but Zaid refused. It's for your own good, my love, so you can fully adjust to your new life, he said. Amina's transformation happened slowly but steadily. Her Western clothes were replaced by abayas and veils, and her cheerful, fast English turned into slow, shy Arabic. Her dream of becoming a nurse faded, replaced by the expectation to be a quiet, obedient wife. Zaid explained every change, every rule, as a way of showing his love and protecting her. The outside world is dangerous, he would say. Here, you are safe, loved, cared for. What more could you want? And even though a part of Amina resisted, another part started to believe him. When Amina found out she was pregnant, it brought a little happiness into her dark world. Zaid was thrilled, saying their baby would be the proof of their love. Our child will be the living proof of our love, he said. But her pregnancy only made Zaid control her even more, claiming it was for the baby's health. He started to control everything she did, even limiting her time in the garden. Every meal, every moment of her day was controlled. As her belly grew, her world got smaller. The mansion, which once felt like a dream, now felt like a prison. The baby growing inside her became her only comfort, her only connection to the woman she used to be. Back in America, her family was worried. They only heard from her occasionally, and every call felt short and stiff, always with Zaid listening in. Amina always said everything was fine, but her mother knew something wasn't right. The joy in Amina's voice was gone, replaced by a dull, resigned tone. Her parents decided to visit her, hoping to see for themselves that she was okay. But when they arrived at Zaid's mansion, they were met with coldness. Zaid stood at the door, his smile fake. Amina is resting, he told them. The pregnancy has worn her out, and she can't see visitors. Amina's parents begged to see her, but Zaid was firm. My wife is under my protection now. She's living by our customs and doesn't need outside influence, he said. Heartbroken and helpless, Amina's parents returned to America, never having seen their daughter. Her mother cried silently on the plane, feeling like she had failed her child. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Amina lay in bed, unaware that her parents had come. Zaid had given her medicine to make her sleep, claiming it was for the baby's sake. Hours later, when she woke up, Zaid told her gently, "Your parents called to say they won't be coming back. They understand that this is your life now." Amina felt something inside her break, as if the last link to her old life had disappeared. She curled up in bed, holding her growing belly, whispering to her baby, "I'll protect you. You'll be free." Months passed, and as her pregnancy continued, so did her despair. When she gave birth to her first child, a boy, Zaid insisted on naming him Omar. Amina was filled with both joy and fear. She loved her son with all her heart, a bright spot in her dark world. But she was also terrified that he would grow up in this controlled, stifling world. She spent hours holding him and singing him soft American lullabies whenever no one was around. In those moments, she felt a small connection to her past, to the woman she used to be. But those moments became fewer and farther apart. Zaid, now excited about fatherhood, became even more controlling. He insisted that Omar be raised only in the Islamic tradition, with no influence from the outside world. When Amina tried to share parts of her culture with her son, Zayd quickly shut her down. Just months after Omar's birth, Amina found out she was pregnant again. The news was a shock. Part of her was happy for the new life inside her, but another part felt overwhelmed by the responsibility and fear that gripped her. The second pregnancy was harder than the first. It drained her physically and emotionally. She spent most of her time caring for Omar and getting ready for the new baby. When she gave birth to a girl, Zayd named her Layla, and Amina found herself struggling to care for two young children while being constantly watched by Zayd. He insisted that Amina didn't need any help from the outside. A good mother should focus completely on her children, he told her. Exhausted and overwhelmed, Amina longed for the comfort of her mother and the company of her friends back in America. As she spent long days and nights caring for her children, she started to miss her old life. She missed the laughter with friends, the warmth of family dinners filled with conversation and love. Memories that once comforted her now felt like a reminder of what she had lost. Despite all the luxury, fine clothes, expensive jewelry, and the beautiful mansion, Amina felt emptier than ever. The wealth around her couldn't fill the emptiness inside her, and it couldn't replace the freedom and sense of self she had lost. Zayd, too, seemed more distant. He was often away on business, and when he was home, his time was split between supervising the children and controlling every aspect of Amina's life. His jealousy grew worse, and he forbade her from having any contact with men, even family members. The rare times they went out together, Zayd watched her every move, every look, and every gesture. Amina began to feel like a beautiful bird, locked in a golden cage, admired but trapped. Her days felt suffocating, always the same. Wake up, care for the children, pray, which Zayd insisted she do. Take care of more children, and sleep. There was no time for her own desires or thoughts. In the few moments she had alone, Amina dreamed of escaping, of taking her children and going back to America, where she could be free. But she knew it was just a distant dream, one that seemed impossible. She had no money, no passport, and no way to reach the outside world. She felt as trapped as if her windows had iron bars. Then, in one of those dark moments, Amina found out she was pregnant for a third time. The news hit her like a shock. 3 children in less than 3 years. Her body, her mind, and her spirit all cried out in protest. When she told Zayd, he was overjoyed. "Allah has blessed us," he said. "Our family is growing." But for Amina, every word felt like another blow to her hopes. This third pregnancy was the hardest. Not just because her body was tired from the other 2, but emotionally too. Amina fell into a deep sadness, staring out the window for hours, dreaming of a different life, a life where she could be free. Her children became her only comfort. In them, she saw a piece of herself, a connection to the life she had lost. In whispers, she told them about America, about the beaches where she had met their father, about the family they never knew. These quiet moments kept her spirit alive. Amina knew she had to find a way out, a way to give her children a better life. In secret, she began to make her plan. She watched the house closely, noting when Zayd would be away, looking for any chance to get to a phone or computer. She stored every small piece of information, waiting for the right time. Life in the mansion went on in its monotonous, gilded routine. Zayd, happy with his growing family and control over Amina, began to relax some rules. He allowed her to go outside to the garden with the children, though security guards always watched them. It was during one of these walks that Amina found her first real chance to reach the outside world. One of the gardeners, an older man with kind eyes, came up to her while pretending to care for the plants. "Mom," he whispered, looking around, "if you need help, There are people who can help you." Amina's heart raced. Could this be real, or was it one of Zaid's tests to see if she would betray him? With shaking hands, she took the small piece of paper he handed her, hiding it deep inside her clothes. That night, pretending to take a long bath, Amina unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. It had a phone number on it and the words, "Call if you need help." Tears fell from her eyes as she memorized the number and then destroyed the paper, making sure no trace remained. The next few days were full of uncertainty. She longed for freedom, but feared the consequences. What would happen to her children if she was caught? Would Zaid take them from her? Would he hurt them, or even her? As she wrestled with these fears, Amina noticed changes in Zaid's behavior. He was becoming more unpredictable, switching between moments of cold kindness and angry outbursts. His demands grew stronger. He insisted that Amina memorize long passages from the Quran and fully adopt his faith. It was during one of his rages that Amina made up her mind. Zaid had exploded in anger when he found out she had been reading an American fairy tale book to the children. He tore the book up in a fury and threatened to send the children to a religious school if she didn't stop. That night, Amina waited until everyone was asleep. With her heart racing, she quietly went into Zaid's study, where she knew he kept a phone. Her hands shook as she dialed the number she had memorized. A soft voice answered on the other end. "Amina," the voice whispered, "please help me. I want to go home." Tears streamed down Amina's face as the voice on the phone reassured her that help was coming. But just as she finished the call, she heard a noise behind her. She turned to find Zaid standing in the doorway, his face full of anger and betrayal. "What have you done?" he growled, rushing toward her. Amina screamed, but his hand covered her mouth. His eyes burned with rage, and the love she once saw in them was gone, replaced with hatred. "How dare you?" Zaid hissed. "After everything I've given you, this is how you repay me?" Amina fought to break free, but Zaid was too strong. He dragged her out of the study, his grip hurting her arm. The children, woken by the noise, began to cry. Their cries broke Amina's heart. "Let me go," she shouted when Zaid finally let go of her mouth. "I can't live like this anymore. This isn't life, it's a prison." Her words only made him angrier. He shoved her against the wall. "A prison?" he snarled. "I've given you everything, luxury, security, a family, and this is how you repay me? By trying to escape like a thief?" Amina stepped back, scared, but a part of her finally spoke up. "I never asked for any of this," she cried, her voice strong. "I want my freedom. I want to go home to my family." Tears flowed down her face, but she didn't stop. "This isn't love, Zaid. It's control. You don't own me." For a moment, Zaid was silent. Then his face grew cold. "Fine," he said in a voice that sounded like ice. "If that's what you want, I'll give you two choices. You can stay here with your children and forget this nonsense, or you can leave. But the children stay with me." Amina's world shattered. "You can't do that," she whispered, horrified. "They're my children. You can't take them from me." Zaid smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, I can, and I will. In this country the children belong to their father. If you leave, you'll lose them forever." Amina felt like she had been punched in the stomach. The idea of leaving her children was unbearable, but staying in this golden prison was just as painful. She fell to the floor, crying uncontrollably. Zaid watched her for a moment before kneeling beside her. His voice softened, but she could feel the threat in his words. "It doesn't have to be like this, my love," he said. "Stay with me. Stay with our children. Forget about all this. Things can go back to normal." The next few days were nothing but misery for Amina. Zaid tightened his grip on her. He watched her every move. Phones were taken away, computers removed. Amina felt like a prisoner. but in her pain, she found strength she didn't know she had. Every time she looked at her children, her desire for freedom grew stronger. She couldn't let them live in fear and control. One night, while Zaid was asleep, Amina made a painful decision. With a heavy heart, she packed a small bag with her belongings. Then she silently went into her children's rooms. She watched them sleep, their innocent faces glowing softly in the moonlight. Tears streamed down her face as she kissed their foreheads. "I love you," she whispered. "Never forget that I love you, and I'll come back for you. I promise." With a broken heart, Amina went to Zaid's study, knowing he kept important papers there, including her passport. As she searched through his desk, she heard a sound behind her. Zaid was standing in the doorway, looking furious. "So, you've made your choice," Zaid said, his voice full of anger. Amina straightened up and looked at him, her heart steady despite the tears on her face. "Yes," she said. "I can't live like this anymore, Zaid. This isn't love. It's a prison, and I refuse to be your prisoner anymore." Zaid stared at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Fine," he said coldly. "You can leave, but first." He pulled out a paper from his desk and put it in front of her. Amina's eyes widened with fear as she read it. It was a document giving up all rights to her children. "You can't ask me to do this," she whispered, horrified. Zaid's gaze was cold and firm. "It's this or nothing. Sign it if you want to leave, or stay here with me. Your choice." Amina felt like the ground had fallen away beneath her. The thought of leaving her children was unbearable, but staying in this prison, losing herself bit by bit, was just as painful. With shaking hands, she took the pen Zaid offered. Each stroke of the pen felt like a painful weight on her heart. When she finished, she felt empty, as if she had just given up everything. Zaid took the paper, looked over it briefly, and nodded. "Your things are ready. The driver will take you to the airport." His voice was cold with no warmth in it. "Don't try to contact the children. Don't come back. If you do, there will be serious consequences." Amina nodded without saying anything. She picked up her small suitcase and followed him out of the house. As she walked toward the car waiting to take her away, she looked back at the mansion one last time. It had been her prison for the past few years. The drive to the airport felt like a blur. She felt numb, unable to understand what was happening. Only when she sat on the plane, looking out the window as Saudi Arabia shrank below her, did the reality hit her. She was free, but at a huge cost. She had left her children behind. Pieces of her heart stayed in that gilded cage. Tears began to fall, and once they started, she couldn't stop them. She quietly sobbed through the whole flight, her body shaking from the weight of her loss. When the plane landed in the US, Amina felt like a shadow of herself. She was back in familiar surroundings, but she felt more lost than ever. As she walked through the airport, she wondered how she would live with the decision she had made, how she would move forward, knowing she had left her children behind. But in her pain, a spark of determination grew. She may have signed that awful paper, and she may have left her children behind, but in her heart she would never abandon them. She would find a way to bring them back, no matter how long it took or what she had to do. With that resolve, Amina took her first steps on American soil, ready to face the hardest battle of her life. The American sun, which once brought her joy, now seemed to mock her pain. She walked through her hometown like a stranger, her eyes filled with tears she refused to shed in public. Every corner, every street reminded her of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else, in another time. Her family welcomed her back, but there was worry in their eyes. Her mother, with new lines of concern on her face, smiled when she saw her daughter, but her smile faded when she noticed the absence of the children. "Where are my grandchildren?" her mother asked, her voice shaky. Amina couldn't hold back the tears anymore. Between sobs, she told her everything. She explained how she had lived in a gilded cage, controlled by Zaid, and how she had been forced to choose between her freedom and her children. Her father listened quietly, his face full of restrained anger. Her mother held her tightly, and their tears mixed together. The next days were filled with emotions and actions. Amina, determined not to give up, started looking for legal help. She visited lawyers, human rights groups, anyone who could give her hope. But the answers were always the same. The situation was complicated. International laws were confusing, and the agreement she had signed made things even harder. Despite the challenges, Amina refused to give in. She spent sleepless nights researching, looking for any way to bring her children back. Her love for them, Omar, Yusuf and Layla, kept her going. As she fought on the legal side, Amina also had to deal with her own inner battles. Nightmares haunted her every night. She dreamed of her children reaching out to her, only to disappear into the darkness. She would wake up screaming, sweating, with her heart racing. Guilt followed her everywhere. She kept asking herself if she had made the right decision. Would it have been better to stay, to put up with the control and fear, just to be with her children? But then Amina remembered the fear she had seen in Omar's eyes when Zaid yelled, and how Yusuf shrank when her father entered the room. She knew she had to fight, not just for herself, but for her children. Amina tried to reach out to Zaid, hoping to talk to him, to beg him to let her see the kids. But her calls were never answered, and her emails bounced back. It felt like he had disappeared from the world, taking pieces of her heart with him. As the months went by, Amina realized that if she ever wanted to bring her children back, she needed to rebuild her life from the ground up. With the constant support of her family and friends, she started getting psychological help. Each session was painful, making her face not only the past trauma, but also the choices that led her to this difficult place. Little by little, Amina began to reconnect with the woman she had been before meeting Zaid. She started her nursing studies again, determined to finish the career she had once dreamed of. Every book she read and every exam she passed felt like a small victory, a way to take back the identity that had been taken from her. Despite these small victories, her legal case seemed to be going nowhere. The lawyers told her that because she had signed the agreement giving up custody of her children, and because of the strict laws in the Middle East, her options were very limited. In the midst of this struggle, Amina met Zara, a woman who had gone through a similar situation. Zara told Amina about international groups that help with child abduction cases. For the first time in a long while, Amina felt a spark of hope. With new energy, she reached out to these groups and shared her story. Soon, she found people who understood her pain and were ready to help. They warned her the journey would be hard and long, but Amina was ready to fight until the end. Meanwhile, life in Saudi Arabia continued for her children, Omar, little Hana, and Yusuf. Zaid, angry at Amina for leaving, had hired a nanny to care for them. He told the children their mother had abandoned them and no longer loved them. But the kids, especially Omar, the oldest, held on to memories of their mother. They remembered her love and the secret stories she had told them about America. Amina had unknowingly become a figure of hope in their minds. Omar kept her memory alive, telling his younger siblings stories about her. Deep in their hearts, they knew their mother loved them and hadn't left by choice. In America, Amina continued her fight. Each day felt like a battle, and every small success brought her closer to her children. She joined support groups for parents in similar situations, drawing strength from the community and sharing her story. As time went on, Amina realized that her struggle was no longer only her own. She had become a voice for other women in similar situations, giving speeches, attending forums, and fighting not only for her children, but also for all mothers separated from their children by unfair laws. She did interviews, spoke at events, and shared her story again and again, hoping her voice would make a difference. The support she got was overwhelming, with messages of encouragement from people around the world and human rights groups backing her cause. Amina found herself leading a movement, fighting not just for her children, but also for changes in international child custody laws. The journey, however, was still difficult. Every time she had to say goodbye to her children after a visit, her heart broke again. Watching them grow and change, knowing she was missing so much of their lives, was a constant pain. There were moments of hopelessness, nights when the weight of the struggle seemed unbearable. But every morning, Amina would look in the mirror and remind herself why she was fighting: for Omar, Yusuf, and Layla, for all mothers in similar situations, for justice, for love. As time went by, Amina started to notice changes in her children. Omar, now a teenager, began questioning the things Zaid had told them about their mother. Yusuf, becoming more aware of the restrictions placed on her as a girl in Saudi Arabia, looked at Amina with a new respect. And Gustavo, though still young, was starting to understand the complicated situation their family was in. It was during one of these visits that Omar asked a question that would change everything. "Mom," he whispered, glancing nervously at the social worker in the room, "could we come live with you in the US?" Amina felt like her heart stopped. It was the question she had longed for, but also feared for so long. "Sweetheart," she replied carefully, "I would love nothing more, but it's complicated. Your father has custody, and the laws here—" "I know," Omar interrupted, frustration and determination in his voice. "But we're not little kids anymore. Don't we have a right to decide?" That conversation sparked a new hope in Amina. If her children wanted to be with her, and if they could express that in court, maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. With fresh energy, Amina and her lawyers began working on a new legal plan. They focused on the children's right to have a say in what happened to them. It was risky, especially in a country where fathers had almost all the power, but it was a chance they couldn't ignore. The next few months were full of legal meetings. Amina spent her time visiting her children, working with her lawyers, and continuing her advocacy. Every day was hard, but the thought of reuniting with her children kept her going. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the day of the important hearing arrived. Amina entered the courtroom, her heart racing. Zaid was already there, his face cold and determined. For the first time, Omar, Yusuf, and Layla were also in the room. The judge listened carefully as Amina's lawyers argued that the children should be able to maintain a relationship with both their parents and have a voice in the decisions about their lives. Then came the moment Amina had both feared and hoped for. The judge called Omar to the stand. Omar spoke with a maturity beyond his years. He talked about his love for both parents, but also his wish to learn about his mother's country, to experience a different life. He explained that his siblings had all discussed it and agreed they wanted this. Amina listened, tears in her eyes, proud and filled with love for her children. When Omar finished, there was a silence in the courtroom. Even Zaid seemed shaken by his son's words. The judge said he would need more time to decide. The weeks that followed were full of waiting and hoping. Finally, the day of the verdict came. Amina walked into the courtroom, her legs shaking. When the judge spoke, it felt like time stopped. After carefully considering all aspects of this case, including the wishes of the children, he began, "This court has decided that it is in the children's best interest to maintain some contact with their mother." Amina's heart skipped a beat. Was she hearing this right? "Therefore," the judge continued, "the mother has been granted monthly supervised visits with her children. These visits will take place in a new, neutral setting under the supervision of a court-appointed social worker. Tears started to flow down Amina's face. After 5 long years, she would finally see her children again. It wasn't the full victory she had hoped for, but it was a start. Zaid, angry with the decision, promised to appeal, but for now Amina had a chance, a window to reconnect with her children. The first visit was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Amina spent every moment preparing, buying gifts, practicing what she would say. When the day arrived, she was so nervous she could barely breathe. The visitation center was cold and unwelcoming, but to Amina, at that moment, it felt like the most beautiful place in the world. When the door opened and her children walked in, her heart stopped. Omar, Yusuf and Layla stood there, looking at her with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. Amina wanted to rush to them, to hug them, to kiss them, but she held back, knowing that to them she was almost a stranger. Tears fell down her cheeks. "I'm your mum," she said softly. "I've missed you all so much." For a moment, no one moved. Then Omar took a step forward. "I remember you," he said quietly. "You used to sing to us in English." Those simple words were enough to break Amina's heart. Overcome with emotion, she could barely speak. Slowly, the children walked toward her. The next 2 hours felt like a blur, filled with hesitant conversations, careful hugs, and soft promises. When it was time to say goodbye, Amina's heart broke again. But this time, there was a feeling of hope mixed with the pain. She wasn't a stranger to her children anymore. She was their mother, and she was fighting for them. As she watched her children walk away, Amina made a silent promise. No matter how long it took or how hard it was, she would find a way to bring her children home. This visit was just the beginning. With renewed strength, Amina left the visitation center, ready to fight the next battle to get her children back. The journey would be long and hard, but now she had something she hadn't had in 5 years, a little bit of hope. As the taxi took her back to her hotel, Amina looked out the window at the city that had once been her prison. Now it was the place where she would fight for her family, and this time she wasn't ready to give up. The future was uncertain. She didn't know if she'd ever bring her children home, or if they would be a family again, but she knew she would keep fighting, day after day, year after year, if needed. Because in the end, Amina understood that a mother's love has no limits, won't be stopped by unfair laws, and can overcome any challenge. With that love driving her, Amina was ready to face whatever the future brought. As the sun set, Amina closed her eyes and whispered to the wind, "We'll be together again, no matter how long it takes. No matter what I have to do, I'll find a way to bring you home." With that promise in her heart, Amina prepared for the long road ahead, knowing each step would bring her closer to her children. Yusuf, once shy and quiet, started to change under Amina's constant love. He held on to her tightly during every visit, as if he feared she might disappear again. Meanwhile, the legal battle continued. Zaid, angry about the court's decision, appealed, just as he had promised. Amina and her lawyers worked through a complicated legal system, facing both small victories and painful defeats. But Amina didn't give up. Back in the United States, Amina's story started to get attention from the media. She became the symbol of a bigger fight, fighting for mothers separated from their children by unfair laws and borders. She gave interviews, spoke at events, and shared her story over and over, hoping her voice would make a difference. The support she received was overwhelming. People from all over the world sent messages of encouragement, and human rights groups joined her cause. Amina found herself leading a movement, fighting not just for her children, but also for changes in child custody laws around the world. But the road remained tough. Every time she had to say goodbye to her children after a visit, her heart broke again. Watching them grow and change while knowing she was missing so much of their lives was always painful. There were moments of despair, nights when the weight of her struggle felt unbearable. But every morning, Amina would look in the mirror and remind herself why she kept going, for Omar, Yusuf and Layla, for all mothers in similar situations, for justice, for love. As time went on, Amina noticed changes in her children. Omar, now a teenager, started questioning the things Zaid had told them about their mother. Yusuf, more aware of the restrictions placed on her as a girl in Saudi Arabia, looked at her with new admiration. And Gustavo, though still young, was beginning to understand the difficult situation their family was in. During one of these visits, Omar asked a question that would change everything.